like to make a motion that North Carolina create license plates where the motto is, we're all fucking people. All right, let's switch gears a little bit here. Our next storyteller works at BetaBox, which is a cool tech company, but he's also a writer. And when I think of ink, probably many of you think of ink, we think of writing a story. So he's here to tell you about a very interesting book that he wrote. Please welcome to the stage to tell a story called A Story Every Day, Nicholas Saber.
People do a lot of different things to try and find themselves. I think we heard some interesting ones tonight. It can be anything from getting a tattoo to dropping out of school to trying to sell all your stuff and move to another country, or climb a mountain and try and find Uber or whatever. I haven't done any of those things. I don't have a tattoo, so I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing here. But for me, there was this point right out of school when it was like my ambition hit this cliff. And I came face to face with this question that I think all of us have faced at some point. Where am I going to go to find myself? And I remember thinking that I never felt like I could find myself in Raleigh. I had just graduated from school and I was like, I don't feel like no matter how hard I try, I could never find myself in Raleigh. Which is a weird thing to say here in Raleigh. But, and I remember right after I graduated from school, I went for a run in downtown and I was thinking about all of this, and I was just, this question kept running through my head. Where am I going to go to find myself? And for me, the answer to that question was New York City. And for anyone who has the goal of making films as a career, New York is the place to go. It's either New York or LA, and LA was on the West Coast, so I was like, I'm gonna stick on the East Coast. So that's what I did. So I started applying for tons and tons of jobs in New York, just every single day, just tons and tons of jobs. And in order to save up money to move to New York, I took this terrible job doing door-to-door political surveys in Cary, in North Carolina. I now hate Cary, North Carolina. No offense to anyone who lives in Cary, North Carolina, but it's not one of my favorite places in the world because of that. So I was doing this door-to-door political survey. I ended up taking an internship in New York City that paid $40 a day. And they called me up. I was actually out in Cary delivering door-to-door political surveys when I got the phone call. They were like, yeah, we want to offer you this internship. I was like, all right, I'm taking it. And I remember doing a spreadsheet so I could calculate out okay, can I actually afford to move to New York with $40 a day? And I could just barely made it. And so I was like, all right, I'm moving to New York. So I packed my life into a suitcase and I got on this overnight bus to Chinatown, and they dropped me off in the middle of Chinatown, and I had absolutely no idea what the hell I was doing. Just to give you an idea of how little of an idea I had, the first time I got into the subway, I swiped my card, to go through the turnstile, and I pushed my luggage through the turnstile instead of walking through the turnstile myself, which if any of you have taken the subway in New York, you know that's not how it's supposed to work, especially when there are people running the opposite direction trying to get through. So I figured that out. And so when I got to New York, my ambition led me to all of these different doors. And when I got there, I realized a lot of these doors were either locked, or they were heavy, or they were just dead-bolted shut. And the thing about that is, it would seem like New York is the best place to tell stories. New York City wants you to believe that New York is the best place to tell stories. It's the best place to make films. It's the best place. If you want to be a filmmaker, that is where you should go. And when I got to New York, I realized that maybe it might not be the best place for a filmmaker. And that's because of a couple of reasons. One is all the filmmakers who move to New York, they move there to work on their own projects. And so it takes a long time to build up this trust and this community of filmmakers who are willing to work on your projects. So that was the first thing. The second thing is New York is an expensive place to live. You know, if you're trying to make a film, you might you're going to need money to make this film, but a lot of that money is probably going to be spent on either rent or food. That's just how it works. And then so even if you can find people that you trust to work on your film, and even if you can afford to make a film, you're going to you're going to run into this problem of just living in New York in general. There are a lot of things that are difficult. Like, you'd think that transportation should just be extremely easy, but most of the time you'll spend an hour to 2 hours just in the subway. And so in my mind, this was a struggle, because it was, every day I would be spending an hour or two on the subway, and I was like, this is time that I could be spending doing something else. And so I felt like, even though I was walking down this hallway of just like doors of opportunities everywhere, it still felt like there was this time that I was spending, and it was valuable time that I knew I wasn't going to be able to get back. And so I thought a lot about this, like where could I go with this? Where's the best direction to go? And it's through all the crowded sidewalks and the crowded subways and the closet of an apartment that I lived in, I started to think that maybe the place where I'm going to find myself is not through the lens of a camera, but maybe the place where I'm going to find myself is sort of this core of what I'm really passionate about, which is creating stories. And so I thought a lot about this, and I decided that to try that. I decided to explore just creating stories, just a story. And I think it was interesting because living in New York, you realize that every city has a fuel. And New York, the fuel that runs New York is obsession. Everyone who's there has some strain of obsession just in what they're doing. And so I borrowed a little bit of this obsession and I applied it to the one thing that I believed I would be able to find myself in, and that was stories. So I started writing stories, and it wasn't just one story, it wasn't just a collection of stories. I knew that if I really wanted to try and find myself in something, I would have to do this every single day. It wasn't just, if you're searching for yourself, if you're looking for yourself, if you're really trying to find your passion, it's not like a monthly exercise. You can't just constrain it to a weekend and be like, all right, great, like I'm just gonna do this on the weekend and I'm gonna end up finding myself. And so that's what I did. So every single day I would get up my $40 a day internship and I would rush into the subway and I would go back to Brooklyn and I would run up the 5 flights of stairs to my small, tiny little apartment, and I would write these words, and I would write them with the hope and the anticipation that if I had these stories printed in ink and was able to hold them in my hands, then I would be able to find a more clear picture of who I was. So I did this. And I committed myself to this project. It wasn't just a once a week thing. It was every single day. And so I decided for 1 year, I'm going to write one short story every single day. So 365 stories, 365 days, an entire year. And it was insane. It was as insane as it sounds, probably more. It was just crazy. It was very strange. It was mysterious. It was like, every single day I would face this blank page and not even know, like, can I finish this story? And then even if I did finish it, I would get to the end and think back and look at it, and I would think a little bit about, okay, I just wrote this, but I would think more about where I was going, and I was going to have to write another story. And so I was continually facing this blank page of not knowing what I was doing and where I was going. And so I spent a couple of months doing this project and just living in New York and thinking and hoping, when I was riding the subway, that I would be able to look up and see this reflection of myself and I would be able to find myself in New York. But after a while, I was back in Raleigh, and I was helping a good friend of mine from school start a company. And just like 2 years before, I remember going for a run and thinking, if I couldn't find myself in New York, would I be able to find myself anywhere? And now I can say that it wasn't a city that helped me find myself. It wasn't Raleigh, and it wasn't New York, and it wasn't any of that kind of thing. So as I was doing this project, once I got to the end of the project, it was the last 30 days of the year, and it was the last 30 more stories left to go before I had 365 stories, and I knew that I wanted to have these stories published, and so I launched a Kickstarter campaign. And this was a really, really difficult time because I had done this whole project, done this whole year. I was helping my friends start a company, so it was, on top of doing this story every day, I was like launching a startup. So working really, really late at night, getting home, and I would write until like late hours of the night, and it was just eating into the amount of sleep that I had. And so all of this stuff compounded. And a couple weeks into the project, when I felt the most uncertain about what I was doing, and I just felt the most uncertainty about how are people going to think about these stories, how are people going to respond, like this was an insane thing to do, are these stories even good, are people going to want to read these? All of this stuff was just running through my head. I started getting emails from people all across the world telling me, I cannot wait to read your stories. And I realized it wasn't a city, it wasn't New York, it wasn't Raleigh, it wasn't this successful Kickstarter campaign, and it wasn't these people all across the world that got me closer to finding myself. It was ink. It was the act of putting my thoughts on paper and trusting that these words would slowly sort themselves into stories where I could catch just a glimpse of the person that I am. So ink is the tool that I use to find myself. And when I finally got these books published and I opened them up and I looked at the pages, I started to wonder, maybe I've been waiting in these stories, waiting to find myself there all along.